Welcome to Husband Talking. Explore riveting tales of infidelity with us. Please subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's begin.
My wife, Emily, knows me so well she can predict where I'll take her out to dinner. Though I've tried hard to surprise her, she has an instinct for when I need a little tender loving care too. Emily knows everything about my life, from awkward flirtations with girls in high school to the frustration of being passed over for a promotion I thought I deserved. She knows I'm scared to death of spiders, whether they're dangerous or not, and she knows I can't bear to hear small children cry without wanting to pick them up and comfort them. A trait I have because my father could never bring himself to hug me. Everything about me, I entrust to my dear wife. She knows I always go to lunch at 12 every day because I had to take a lunch break at that early hour when I was the most junior guy in the office. Back then, I'd always be back at 1 because other people wanted to leave around that time. I got into the habit and never changed it. But today, Emily doesn't know I'm taking a late extended lunch because the whole office is going out to a farewell party for one of the senior administrators, the director of the research and development branch where I work. Sam Peterson was retiring after 27 years, and the whole operation was being shut down to wish him a happy retirement. Josh was one of the youngest engineers working in my division, and I was happy to have him under my supervision. He was a hard worker, imaginative, and highly resourceful. When it came time for merit pay increases and bonuses, I was happy to put in his name. With his first big bonus, Josh bought one of those massive Ford Expedition. He had one kid and another on the way, so he wanted a vehicle big enough for lots of kids. Apparently, his wife felt the same way. Privately, I considered his new SUV big enough for a whole clan, much less one family, but he was proud of it and wanted to show it off. With my seniority, I got to ride shotgun on the way down to the convention center. "So, Ben, what do you think of my new buggy?" Josh asked. "That's me, Adam Parker, 32 years old, in pretty good health, and well thought of within my field of expertise, mechanical engineering, though lately my job has had little to do with that degree. I hadn't been a manager for very long, but it was taking up more and more of my time. I was even thinking of taking some night courses in personnel and resource management to keep up with the responsibilities my boss kept pushing my way." "It's cool," I replied, injecting some enthusiasm into my voice. Or is that supposed to be hot or tight these days? I can never remember what the latest slang is. I told him, and he laughed. "You like it?" "Oh heck yeah," I said. I twisted around to peer into the interior of the spacious vehicle. "Shoot, Josh," I remarked, "I think the first apartment Emily and I lived in was smaller than this." He laughed, pleased with my comment. I turned back around to face the front as Josh braked to a stop at a red light. I saw once again how high off the road I was sitting. Josh's truck, as he called it, gave the driver and passengers an excellent view all around and even over most of the cars on the road. I glanced down out the passenger side window when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I was surprised to see my wife sitting in her 2-year-old Nissan Altima beside us at the light. This wasn't a part of town that Emily would normally go. It was a long way from her office, and she rarely had to leave during the day. I was looking at the controls on the door panel, trying to figure out which one lowered the window, but it was taking too long. I started to open the door to tap on my wife's car window when I saw another movement. As I watched, a man's hand was thrust up her skirt so far his wrist and some of his forearm disappeared. I froze. My gut knotted up so badly and so quickly I was abruptly deep in pain. I felt the blood drain from my face. My fingers trembled where they rested on the door handle. I felt disoriented. Couldn't think. Couldn't move. All I could do was watch. I waited for Emily to shove the man's hand away. Surely, this was nothing she would put up with from any man but me. I found it hard to breathe as I watched my wife spread her legs wider, accepting the intruding fingers into her skirt. The guy she was with, whoever he was, had to have 2 or 3 fingers inside her. There simply wasn't any way that length of male arm could disappear under her short skirt without his fingers being in a place I thought only I had access to. "Please no," I whispered, but no one heard. I've only passed out one time, after being struck on the head by a baseball when I was 11 years old. I was feeling the same sensations I'd felt that day right now. My vision began to contract into a narrow tunnel, and a huge weight was crushing my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I'm a strong man, but the shock siphoned all my strength away. I was nothing but an empty shell, If I'd been lying across a set of railroad tracks and had only to roll to the side to avoid being run over by a train, I couldn't have done it. My eyes filled with unshed tears as I watched my wife of 5 years lean back to better enjoy this unknown man's ministrations. She never objected, never tried to get the man to stop. It came to me that this was a thing Shed enjoyed before with this man, a thing she wanted and was used to receiving. Emily tilted her head back, her eyes closed as she lost herself in the pleasure his fingers were giving her. The look of lust and need for gratification shocked me. It was the same one she showed me when we had sex. The light turned green. I saw Emily slap at the man's forearm playfully. She tugged his hand from beneath her skirt so she could drive, I guess. I twisted around in my seat as Josh accelerated away from the intersection. I watched my wife's Accord as it made a right turn down a street that would take her back to where she worked. Shed never looked up to wonder who might be watching in the big Sequoia. Not that she would have seen me through the dark-tinted windows. She knew I wouldn't be out and about at this hour. My lunch hour ended 30 minutes ago. She hadn't cared what an obscene exhibitionistic show she and the man with her had put on for whoever it might have been. It didn't have to be me watching. Could have been anyone. Emily had been so caught up with the sex play that she hadn't thought to conceal the act. Yeah, my wife knew me well, but it seemed I only thought I knew her. When she got home that evening, I got a quick peck on the cheek. A few years ago, my mind told me I'd gotten long, loving kisses at the door when I came in from a hard day's work. Somewhere along the line, they decreased in number until they tailed off to nothing. I watched my wife as she started up the stairs. Suddenly, I noticed something missing. It hadn't struck me earlier in the day as I watched her perform in traffic. "Emily," I blurted, "what the heck happened to your pantyhose? I know for a fact you put on a new pair this morning. How come you're not wearing any now?" She hesitated before proceeding down the hallway to her bedroom. She didn't turn around to face me for a long moment. "Oh, I got a runner in the right leg," she said finally. "Kept on growing and growing, and I finally just took them off," she said. She grinned back at me, looking at me more intently than I think she would have under other circumstances. She needed to know if I was buying her explanation. I nodded understandingly. She turned away, but not before I detected a small look of relief cross her face. "I see," I said in what I hoped was a more playful tone. I hadn't planned to say anything, but a sudden surge of pain and rage had taken control of my tongue and made me ask about the pantyhose. The dual emotions still had control of me. An evil imp pushed me into seeing how far I could provoke my dear wife. "I thought some guy might rip them off because he was in a hurry to get into your panties," I said, studying her reaction. She was good. There was little to see beyond a slight stiffening in her posture. "What in the world brought that on?" she said inquisitively. I looked at her with as blank a face as I could manage. I refused to let the hurt and anger show in my eyes. I shrugged. "It's been known to happen," I said. "You remember Kate, that girl I had to fire last year after she got caught screwing one of the men on the loading dock? Well, I remember her coming back from breaks and lunches without her thigh-high stockings and pantyhose many a time. That was before I knew what was going on, of course." I shrugged and looked away, trying to project an image of a man remembering a painful event. Emily nibbled at her lower lip for a bit before coming to me. Stepping close to me, she put her palms flat on my lower ribs and swept them up my chest in a slow caress before throwing her arms around my neck. She pulled my head down and pressed her lips against mine for a few teasing seconds. "Honey," she said earnestly when she finally broke off the kiss, "you are the only man who will ever rip my panties off. I thought you knew that." There was a hooded expression on her face, her eyes flicking from side to side as she searched my face for some telltale sign. She was gauging my reaction, hoping I would accept her explanation. I was willing to bet she was wondering how much I knew and what Shed have to do to deflect my suspicions. It broke my heart all over again. Shed been lying by omission all along, and now she was lying to my face. It was a raw, calculating thing to do, born of deception and reared by cruelty. I'd hoped. Well, I didn't know what I hoped for. I guess I thought that if I got a confession from her, we'd find some way to get past this, even if I had no idea how. If you love someone, though, it's hard to let go without one last attempt. But Emily was waiting for an answer. I'd been looking too long into her eyes for something I just this second gave up all hope of finding. "I know that, sweetheart," I said with as much sincerity as I could muster. "Katie's husband threw her out and got custody of both kids. She wrecked her marriage, the other guy's marriage, and her life, all for a little stupid dirty sex out behind the warehouse." I let my contempt color the last few phrases. Emily flinched slightly, almost undetectably, but her expression never changed. "Well, she deserved it," she said, and now the deceit was complete. My dear wife thought the rules by which other people restrain themselves didn't apply to her. I caught her wrists in my hands and tugged her arms from around my neck. I looked at her steadily, not saying a word, and then kissed her lips gently. Taking hold of one of her shoulders in each hand, I turned her around and slapped her beautifully shaped little bum. It didn't belong to me anymore. It no longer mattered that she didn't like even playful spanks. "Now go get changed. You'll have dinner on the table in 10 minutes, I told her. I turned away and walked into the kitchen without looking back. At first, I had no idea what to do. I didn't have a clue what I should do. What was the approved reaction from a husband who discovered his wife was cheating on him? I'm afraid the company didn't get much work from me over the next week and a half. I would be working on something and then would suddenly find myself gazing into space, not knowing how long I'd been doing it. A number of the staff members asked me if there was anything wrong, but I always replied there was not. No one could help me through this. I'd have to solve the riddle by myself. I was able to reason my way through a few things. For one, the fact that the guy felt comfortable fondling my wife in public said they had been having sex for some time. If they were just beginning with each other, he'd still be a lot more tentative. It meant Emily had been cheating on me for some time. I wondered when it had begun. I couldn't remember any signs that she was cheating on me. There had been no attitude changes or any modifications in our daily life that I could think of. In the final analysis, though, it didn't really matter how long it had been going on. The only important factor was that it was happening. Second, I wasn't going to put up with her infidelity. I was not going to go off to work each day wondering who Emily was screwing that day. I wasn't much of a church-going man anyway, and there was no way I was going to turn the other cheek. It wasn't in me to do that. I couldn't see any point in trying to save the marriage. Emily had broken the trust we'd built up over the 5 years of our marriage. It seemed to me she'd broken it a number of times, judging by the evidence, and I didn't know how it could ever be made whole again. The only thing that logically remained to do was to confront her and get myself out of this mess with my mind as intact as I could. If there was something I'd done so terribly wrong that it prompted a reaction like this from Emily, maybe she'd tell me. I tried to pull my eyes back inside the windows through which I'd been staring blindly. I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. The hurt came in cold waves, alternating with fiery periods of anger. Neither emotion would let me be long enough to do any productive work. Having decided that my marriage to Emily was dead, I set myself the dreary task of finding some quick way out of my pain. The thing was, without proof of some kind, Emily would probably be able to take damn near everything we'd put together. State courts are not friendly to a man making unsubstantiated allegations about his wife. I shoved what loving feelings I had left for Emily behind a door in my mind and slammed it shut. I decided I wanted my share of what we had. We had some good equity in the house, and the savings account was beginning to show a nice balance. Finally, we both were making pretty good money and had been for a year or so, so we managed to buy some quality furniture and appliances. The cars had both been financed, but we'd been making balloon payments and the loans were nearly paid off. If I wanted my fair portion of what we'd accumulated, I had to catch her red-handed. I watched for an opportunity. On Tuesday, one day short of 2 weeks after I'd seen Emily letting some jerk play with her, she told me she was going to go out Saturday night with a group of her girlfriends for a few drinks and lots of gossip. It was something she and a half-dozen women in her crowd did every 6 weeks or so, she said. Olivia, Alice, Claire, Laura, and Grace were going along, but not Sophie, Emily's best friend. They were going to find all the things they could to talk about Sophie behind her back. Emily giggled a little about that when she told me. There was absolutely nothing suspicious about her doing this. She'd done it before on widely separated occasions through the years. I knew in my heart though this one was different. I couldn't see anything in her behavior that indicated she was not actually going to do exactly what she told me, but I didn't trust her anymore. I had to verify what she was saying. Olivia, I said cheerfully into my cell phone. Olivia was one of my wife's friends. She and her husband Noah were occasional guests over at what had been our house for barbecues and sometimes dinner. Hey, Tiger, she responded happily. Olivia liked to flirt, and she took every opportunity. What up? She asked. Not much, I said. I was just wondering if you and Noah have any plans for Saturday night. I was thinking the four of us might get together for dinner and some cards. She said in her mock seductive voice. They'll have to check my busy calendar, big boy. There was a momentary pause, but not one long enough for her to actually be checking anything. No, nothing on tap for that night, sugar, she said. They'll have to check with Noah, but I think it sounds like a great idea. What shall we bring? Just your cute little self, your better half, and a pair of bright smiles, I quipped. I tried to sound upbeat, but inside I was dead. All the pleasure in my life had disappeared over the past few weeks. Okay, Han, she said. I'll give you a call when I know for sure. Okay? She paused briefly. And Ben, me and Noah are sure glad you and Emily are doing so well. Sugar. I frowned into empty space as I listened. We weren't sure after the Vegas trip that you guys would be able to get things together, you know? She said in a more serious voice than I'd ever heard from her. Vegas? I said, a little mystified. I thought at first she was aware of Emily's fling, though I didn't have an inkling how she would have known. The trip she was referring to was one I hadn't gone on because, at the last minute, my boss had called, needing me to go to San Francisco to straighten out a mess in the RD division of our parent company. Emily, Sophie, and her husband Jake, Olivia, and Noah had gone without me, and by all accounts, everyone had come back with small winnings for once. Wait, was Olivia saying something had gone on in Vegas? Hell, she had to be, but I needed to know more. It made me sick, but I had to know. I don't understand what you're trying to say, Olivia, I said. Even I could hear the confusion in my voice. She was silent for a long time. Oh, it's just scatterbrain old me, she said. You know how I am. Well, listen, they'll get with Noah and check if he's already got something planned for tomorrow or not. Okay? Sure, let me know, I replied. She said she would. I got off the phone as quickly as I decently could. I was afraid my voice would reveal the pain I was in. Half an hour later, Olivia called back and apologized. Noah had obligated himself to play in a poker game at a neighbor's house. Olivia was just as sorry as she could be. Maybe next time, she said. I agreed, regretting that they couldn't come. Maybe Emily and I would just forget about the whole thing and try again at a better time. Neither of us was fooling the other. I knew two things now: something involving my wife had occurred in Miami, and Emily was not going out with the girls tomorrow night. I had to let the former lay uninvestigated while I dealt with the latter. I've heard it said that adulterous spouses get into a mindset where they conclude they must be more intelligent than those they are cheating on, simply because they're getting away with what they're doing. They begin to believe they are cleverer than anyone else in the world because they managed to deceive their marriage partner for a time. They begin to disrespect him or her and hold their spouses in contempt. Eventually, so the story goes, cheaters start making mistakes because of overconfidence. They don't think anyone else has the smarts to catch them. I didn't know about all that. This was my first experience dealing with such a thing. But I did know that Emily was making mistakes. If I hadn't seen her that day with that sorry guy in her car at the stoplight, I'd have caught on to her activities eventually anyway. Being in public with that man was a bad mistake. Any one of our friends or neighbors could have been in a van or SUV beside her car. It didn't have to be me. Not making sure Olivia would cover for her was another blunder. A major one. Second, she knew I was friendly with Olivia and Noah, even more so with Sophie and Jake. Whatever happened in Vegas was almost certainly known by both couples. Either of them might have called me sometime to give her up. These were loose ends she should have tied up somehow. Her third error was assuming I still trusted her and would stay home like a good little boy while she was out whoring around. Her fourth was thinking I would put up with a cheating tramp of a wife. I smashed my fist down on the coffee table beside me, making the lamp dance around on its base for a long moment. Emily was in the shower, she didn't hear a thing. I massaged my hand and wrist, seething inside as I contemplated my wife's betrayal of our marriage, herself, and me. I was worried that my anger was going to take over my whole life. It seemed to me that my jaws were always clenched tight these days, and my pulse pounded whenever I thought of what Emily and that guy were doing. I was ruthlessly suppressing those feelings when I was around her. It only made the rage burn that much hotter. The sad thing was that I was actually a little relieved when it became clear tonight was to be their next little get-together for sex. I hated to admit that to myself, but I was. Once I got through whatever I had to face this evening, I'd take what I knew and put it in the hands of my attorney. I had him primed and ready to file charges whenever I gave him the go-ahead. Emily left a little after 7, just as twilight was beginning to make soft shadows all around. She thought I was in the garage straightening up the disorder that accumulates if one doesn't give it constant attention. But I was really just killing time, waiting for her to leave. Now that the evening had come, I was anxious to get things over with and move on with my life. Emily hadn't been interested enough in what I was doing to come outside for a look, much less to spend any time with me. I guess she was just happy I was out of her way so she could get ready for her date or whatever she was calling it. That was fine with me. If she'd come out to be with me, she'd have seen the rental Lincoln ID arranged for that morning. I hadn't wanted to park the shabby-looking wreck on the street. It might have been towed as an abandoned vehicle. It was a small lie, I suppose, hiding the rental's existence. That's what's wrong with lying and cheating. The lies begin to take on a life of their own and reproduce more of their kind spontaneously. There were 3 more lies told as she walked out the door. I wished her a good time, and we both said we loved each other. A man and a woman who loved each other wouldn't be doing the things to each other that we were going to do tonight, I told myself. I didn't care. When she was far enough down the block not to be able to see inside the garage, I opened the outside side door and jumped in the rental car. Driving away, I pointed the remote over my shoulder to close the door and sped down our residential street to make sure I didn't lose contact with her. Paradoxically, I had to slow drastically when I saw her ahead, waiting at a stoplight for cross-traffic to clear. I had to pull to the curb and stop for a bit, or I'd have gotten too close. As it turned out, following her didn't prove to be that big a problem. Like most drivers, she paid almost no attention to the traffic behind her, and even if she had, she wouldn't have known to look for a beat-up 8-year-old gray Chrysler sedan. She had no idea that her husband was in that vehicle tonight, trailing her half a city block behind. The light was still good enough for me to identify her vehicle, but it was gradually getting darker. It gave me an excuse to turn on my headlights. If she were to look back, she wouldn't be able to see my face past the glare. I followed her through thinning traffic to the far southwest side of town and watched her pull into a moderately priced motel. I quickly found a space across the street and parallel parked my ratty old vehicle. Getting my camera ready and trying to settle my jangled nerves, I watched out the driver's side window while my wife sat in her car for 5 minutes or so. It seemed she was impatient. She made a series of quick calls on her cell phone. Mine didn't ring, it was not me she was calling. A few minutes later, a big dark blue SUV came down the street and turned into the motel. I could see the driver was a male, but he was going too fast for me to get a good look at him. He parked beside my wife's Accord, and they both got out shortly. The guy had my wife in a tight embrace and was kissing her hungrily. After a bit, she patted his chest and pulled back a little. I bought a Nikon D7100 digital camera when I started planning this operation a couple of weeks ago. Even with my limited experience with digital cameras, it looked like this camera was going to be perfect for the job I had to do. I started snapping away, taking pictures of my cheating wife and the guy she was screwing. Though twilight was fading into night, there was still enough illumination under the motel's exterior lighting to light up both of them. The camera's 10x optical zoom, multiplied by its 4x digital zoom, gave me superb close-ups of his hand in her shirt. I could have counted the freckles on my lovely wife's face if I'd been in a counting mood. My only real problem was keeping the camera steady enough. I solved that by scrunching down low, rolling down the window, and bracing the camera on the 2 inches of glass that refused to disappear into the door. Neither of the cheaters across the way noticed me, though I was less than 50 yards away under a street light. They were awfully careless. I guess it was true that cheaters begin believing they don't have to take elementary precautions because they can't be caught. The guy produced one of those plastic cards with the magnetic strip on the back and opened the motel room door. He and my wife went inside, and I settled back to wait them out. I wanted some pictures of them leaving the room to show how long they'd been inside. The camera had the ability to insert a date stamp on the face of the digital pictures, and the downloaded JPG file would show the precise date and time it was saved in the camera. I thought a computer expert would explain such things well enough so any court could understand it. Even if the judge wouldn't accept my explanation, I was sure my attorney would be able to find and hire such an expert. My stomach was churning. The bitter taste of bile was in my mouth. I was barely able to control stomach contractions that kept threatening to force partially digested bits back up my esophagus. The longer I waited, the worse it got. Abruptly, I couldn't hold it back any longer. I wrenched the car door open and spewed an ugly pool of nastiness out onto the pavement. The flood kept regenerating itself long after I thought I'd brought up everything I'd eaten for the last several days. After a minute or two, though, there was nothing more in my stomach. It got painful then. The dry heaves continued for another eternity before gradually dying away. I wiped my mouth on my handkerchief, rinsed my mouth out, and drank a half-liter bottle of water. Shaking with anger, humiliation, and a sense of loss so strong I could barely stand it, I stepped over the mess in the street and walked a few yards up and down the curb to see if it would help settle me down. I glanced at the room door, making sure they hadn't come out yet. I stopped in my tracks. There was only a dim glow coming through most of the drawn curtains, but at one place down low on the left side, there was a small area where the light came through more brightly. I was intrigued. I looked all around to make sure I was unobserved. Then I crossed the street and walked through the motel parking lot. From a few feet away, I could see that my dear wife and the sorry asshole who was with her had been inexcusably sloppy for two people doing something they shouldn't. They left a space a couple of inches across where the curtain had not quite been pulled closed. I glanced around again, checking to see if anyone could see what I was about to do. I decided that I really didn't care what anyone else thought, even if someone did see me. This was an opportunity to photograph these two red-handed, and I was going to take it. I hunkered down on one knee and eased the camera up to the window, aiming it through the opening in the drapes. The LCD screen on the back of the camera lit up when I pressed the power button, and I had my proof. My wife was on all fours on the bed with a short, stocky man with blonde hair getting into position behind her. He was, I guess, the kind of man women thought of as handsome. He looked to be a little younger than me, but it was hard to tell. My hands were trembling too badly for the camera to focus properly, and I had to press the lens against the window. It took some experimentation to get a good series of pics. If I let too much of a gap develop between the window and lens, the harsh brightness of the lights out here reflected off the glass and tended to wash everything out. In a minute or two, though, I had everything I needed. Inside the room, I could see the guy beginning to drill my wife. He wasn't gentle about it, but it appeared Emily had developed a taste for a little rough sex because her face was screwed up in a mask of lust and illicit pleasure. The camera could take 6 pictures in a fast sequence, and I put it on that setting before leaving home. I pressed the shutter release button again and again. I couldn't take too much of watching them. Still badly nauseated and feeling more pain inside than I'd known since my parents died, I settled back on my haunches and tried to get myself together. I drew in a ragged breath and closed my eyes tight to fight back the tears I refused to shed. I hurt, but a human being can only hurt so long before they shift themselves to another place. I pushed my emotions aside, damming them up and putting them back behind that door I thought I had closed on them earlier in the week. Suddenly there was no more love when I thought of her, and I damn sure didn't like her at all. My new remoteness, my detached view, gave me the strength to get to my feet without swaying or feeling sick to my stomach. There was a sudden flurry of loud voices from inside the room. I could hear Emily, but I couldn't tell what she was saying. Then there was a louder shriek a second or two later, but it sounded like a man. I didn't know any men who admitted to being screamers during sex, but I guess they could. Anyway, the suddenly noisy sex play got me on my feet and moving away. I was afraid it would attract someone to come see what was going on. I started to walk back to my rental across the street, but I paused behind the son of a bitch's car while I thought for a long moment. I turned and walked down the sidewalk past all the motel doors. I looked carefully under the eaves, then stepped away from the building to examine the roof and every light pole in sight. I was looking for any outside security cameras the motel might have. I found a place down at the far corner of the structure where there were some unconnected wires and an empty mounting bracket, but I didn't see any cameras. I crossed the parking lot and stood next to the rental car, looking at the empty, abandoned restaurant. There were surely no spy cameras over there. There were some apartment buildings I could see on down this side street, but they were far away on the main thoroughfare. I couldn't see any businesses that would logically be protected by surveillance cameras pointed in this direction. I made sure the cap was securely fastened over the lens and put my camera in the back seat for safekeeping. Walking purposefully, I went back to where my wife and whoever he was were parked. I pulled the pocket knife out of my jeans and opened it while I debated with myself the wisdom of doing what I was thinking of. Then I shrugged and bent low beside Loverboy's rear tires. It took a stronger thrust than I thought it would, but I soon found the right amount of velocity and power to shove the blade deep into the tire. I was afraid my grip would slip and I'd cut myself badly, but that didn't happen. The hissing of the air escaping from the expensive set of tires seemed terribly loud, but no one came out to investigate. Encouraged, I took care of all 4 tires on his SUV and then all of my wife's tires too. I guess it was a childish gesture. It didn't solve anything, and it very well could make it clear to the cheating duo that someone was on to them. I decided they wouldn't think that. They were too cocky. I wanted to do more, but I didn't. 100 years ago, I could have smashed down the door and put a bullet in each of their brains, and no jury would have ever convicted me. 200 years ago, I could have challenged him to a duel and killed him in front of his friends and family. Those were acceptable ways back then for a man to salvage his honor in situations like this. But we're so much more civilized now. A cuckold has so few options open to him these days. I did what I could, feeling a little better and not in the least guilty about the damage I'd done. I walked back to my rental and got in, slamming the door and not caring if anyone heard. I'd taken the first steps to rid myself of a faithless wife and regain some self-respect. There was little remaining yet to do. Wednesday would come soon, and I'd have a long talk with my lawyer. Sunday comes before Wednesday, though, and Saturday before that. Emily came home well before midnight, pissed off because some asshole had slashed the tires on her car outside the club. 3 teens had been seen running away, she said. Then Shed had to wait 3 hours for the AAA folks to get there. Apparently, I'd not been observed damaging the tires, and someone else was suspected. I actually had no idea whether the 3-teen story had any legitimacy, but the 3-hour wait sounded about right. I shrugged. None of it mattered in the least. I was surprised she was home that early, though. I thought she'd be out a lot later with her sex toy. If she was outside waiting for the wrecker for any time at all, it meant her tryst with the new man in her life had been a short one. Not that it made any difference. I said a few consoling words to calm her down. She got in bed and went to sleep shortly after coming in. She hadn't wanted any cuddling. I knew why. The odor of cheap motel soap on her body was strong enough to make me gag. Sunday afternoon and evening, Emily got very affectionate and wanted me close to her. It was impossible to tell from looking at her that she'd been out screwing some other man on Saturday night. She showed no sign of feeling guilty about anything at all. If anything, she was more relaxed and pleasant than she'd been in months. That, I had read, was one of the classic signs of cheating. Whether they showed it or not, they usually felt some degree of guilt and would try to make it up to their dishonored spouse. I had talked to my attorney earlier today while Emily was fixing lunch. Head said to call him at home if I needed to. He was all set, he said. All he needed was my signature on the paperwork, and Head file them at the courthouse before noon tomorrow. The pictures were bargaining chips if Emily contested the divorce. Tomorrow afternoon I was going to be a free man in a sense. The divorce wouldn't actually be final for 6 months, but I'd be separated from the woman who'd brought me so much pain. That night, Emily put on a black lace nightgown she knew I liked and glided seductively across the carpet to where I sat on the bed. I didn't want her, not after I'd seen what I had on Saturday night. I was trying to come up with an excuse not to have anything to do with her tonight. I was sick to my stomach again just at the thought of touching her. I sat on the bed and tried to look uninterested. She stayed with it, though, the very image of a loving wife who wanted some loving from her husband. She moved close to me even though I didn't want to, even though I could barely bring myself to be civil to her. Her caresses were beginning to have a visible effect on me. She smirked, knowing the power she had over me. Pissed me off. Abruptly, I changed my mind. Without any thought at all, much less careful consideration of the consequences. I knew I was going to give my dear deceitful young wife the sex she wanted and more. It would be one last sex session before we separated forever. If I were rational at that moment, I would have known what I was going to try to do to her was rooted in my own humiliation. There was perhaps some arrogance mixed in also, but at the moment all I wanted to do was exact a small measure of vengeance for the disgrace that this woman had heaped on me. Carefully, I built up an image in my mind of a street hooker. I envisioned a tramp who deserved no consideration and who was nothing more than a receptacle for me to use and discard. I would use her as I pleased when I was ready. But my revenge was going to be a little more subtle than that. If it worked, she wouldn't even understand it as retribution for a long time. I let Emily's face blend into the faceless features of the tramp I had just constructed. Having dehumanized Emily sufficiently enough for my purposes, I was ready. I stood up and pulled her close. I was wild and wanted my pleasure. I did the same. She was exhausted by the time I was done with her. When her body relaxed, I let her lay there unmolested. Exhausted myself, I stretched my body out on the bed beside my wife. Our only contact was my fingers around her wrist. After a while, Emily rolled over and cuddled against me, putting her head on my shoulder. "Oh God, honey," she breathed into my chest. "If only you'd—" Her voice faded away before completing whatever she'd been about to say. I didn't care anymore. I didn't ask her what she meant. "All you had to do was be here with me," I answered. I trusted it was enigmatic enough for her to remember tomorrow. She stirred a little, nodding her head as if in reply to what I'd said, and then she slipped quickly into a deep sleep. I got up and took a long, very hot shower. When I finished, I walked down the hall to the guest room and lay down on the bed. Emily had not moved when I walked past her bedroom door now. I doubt she knew I wasn't there. She was sleeping on the wet spot, something that she did not like. She would be irritated when she woke up the next morning. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. I knew what the coming day would bring, and I dreaded it even as I welcomed it, knowing it would bring me release from the demons that had haunted me for the last month. The next morning, I was dressed and gone before Emily woke up. I didn't doubt she was upset by my unexplained absence, but I had no desire to be around her. It was too painful. 3 hours after she left, I was back at the house with a U-Haul truck. ID already delivered the camera to my attorney's office, and one of his assistants had printed 2 copies of everything. The sympathy the young woman felt when she brought them back into the inner office was evident in her eyes. I appreciated it, I guess, but I was suspicious there might have been some pity there too. I didn't want pity. At home again, and after a couple of cups of coffee, I got busy packing up my clothing and the few personal possessions I had brought to the marriage. There were even fewer items we bought together that I wanted to keep. While one of my original goals had been to salvage some of the furniture for my own use, I found I didn't want anything more than the DVD player, a 25-inch TV, and a few music CDs. Nothing else caught my eye. I made a backup of everything on the computer, opened the case, and disconnected the backup hard drive. I put it in my briefcase. I'd buy another computer somewhere to put it in. Before I left, I scattered a dozen prints of the pictures I'd taken last Saturday night on the top of her dresser. I used the computer one final time to print my darling wife a short note in the biggest font I could use and still fit the whole text on the page. "Enjoy the memories of last night, dear. They're the last you'll have of me." This was the second childish thing I'd done in the last 4 days and didn't get any good feelings from this one in the cold light of morning, as it were. But I'd worked hard last night for the opportunity to say this to her, and I wasn't going to back down now. Taping the message to the mirror, I turned around and left what had been our bedroom, down the hall and out the garage door. I didn't bother locking the place up. It was no longer my responsibility. I thought once divorce papers had been served on Emily, our attorneys would talk and work out the division of our property and other assets. Then I figured we'd sign the paperwork, go before the judge, and it would all be over with. Silly me. It seemed discussions between attorneys was necessarily a long, drawn-out process that became negotiations about the most inconsequential of things. For instance, I know the lawyers spent one whole lunch hurry paid for it, on the question of whether I should return the TV I had taken with me or did it constitute my share of the electronic equipment in the house. Who gave a flying? Well, anyway, it was taking forever. What it finally all boiled down to was that the house and all the furnishings were to be sold, and the proceeds divided equally, after the lawyers got their share, of course. Emily and I would identify any furniture or other things in the home that we particularly wanted, and if the other didn't protest, that item was theirs up to a total value of $6,000. I didn't care. I'd already made my selection. I told my attorney just to get on with it. A few weeks after the petition for divorce was filed, but before our first court date, I went over to Jake and Sophie's house to see if I could get some answers to the question of how this whole thing started. Sophie had been Emily's best friend in college, and I'd known Jake slightly over the past few years. We had all become very close. Sophie had become as good a friend of mine as she was Emily's. I realized belatedly that Jake and Sophie had not come to our house, nor had they invited us to theirs since the Vegas trip. Thinking of how Olivia had spoken of Vegas, I wanted to see if Jake and Sophie could shed any light on the problem. They were outside in the backyard when I arrived. When I rang the doorbell, Jake came around the side of the house and escorted me back, handing me a cold beer before having me sit in the shade of a big pecan tree that was growing in the far corner of their yard. We sat for a couple of awkward moments. So I said finally. Sophie burst into tears and got up to run in the house. Jake and I stared at the door through which she disappeared and then at each other. She's a little emotional sometimes, Jake muttered. I know, I said, smiling a little in spite of all the pain everyone was feeling. Sophie was upfront in everything she did, and I loved her for it. In many ways, she was closer to me than my deceased sister ever had been. I took a long swallow of Budweiser Finest. Ron, Jake said at length, Sophie and I are just as sorry as we can be that you and Emily are breaking up. But we didn't know what to do, you know? I looked at him questioningly. I could see comprehension spreading across his face. You don't know? He said. I shook my head. He got 2 more beers from the ice chest beside him and handed one to me. We didn't know whether to tell you when we got back from Vegas or not, he remarked sadly. We thought that surely Emily would tell you what happened. Couldn't be kept hidden. And after a while it seemed she had, and the 2 of you had everything all worked out. Worked what out? I asked quietly. Jake took a deep breath and spent the next 20 minutes explaining how Emily had gotten sloppy drunk the first night in Vegas. Tired and mad because ID had to cancel at the last minute, Emily had told the other 2 couples that if I wasn't going to be there when she needed me, she was going to find someone who would be. Emily spent the rest of the night gulping down hard liquor while dancing and flirting with every man who caught her eye. At some point, Emily and some blonde guy managed to disappear. Even with both of the other couples trying hard to keep track of where Emily and the guy went in the casino, no one saw Emily until the next day. That afternoon, Saturday, Sophie and Olivia had gone to Emily's room and hammered on the door until Emily finally answered. She looked like she'd been rode hard and put up wet, according to what Sophie had told Jake. The blonde guy had been in the bathroom but had come out. Emily had been defensive but also drunk and defiant. The guy had acted completely unconcerned about the whole thing. He left eventually, but since Emily didn't join Sophie, Jake, Olivia, and Noah that Saturday evening, they were pretty sure Emily and the unknown man had hooked up again. Actually, other than that one meeting Saturday afternoon, none of the 4 saw Emily until late Sunday afternoon when she showed up at the airport to board the flight home. They hadn't seen how she got to the terminal, so they couldn't say her boyfriend had brought her. They hadn't cared. I didn't blame them. Sophie had come back outside, wiping her eyes, and was standing behind my chair with her hands on the tops of my shoulders. Every so often, she would pat me as one consoles an unhappy child. I'm not so sure that wasn't exactly what I was at that moment. When Jake finished, I sat looking into space. I wish you told me, I said after a while. I don't know what good it would have done, but some of the lying and the cheating might not have occurred. I sighed and bit my lip, but the damage had already been done, I guess. It wouldn't have made any difference in the long run. How did you find out about Vegas? Sophie asked gently. I craned my neck back to look up at her. You just told me, I replied. She was confused. Well, how did you find out then? She asked. I took her hand in mine and patted it gently. I saw them in Emily's car on the street a few weeks ago, and that blonde guy had his hand up her skirt so far I knew he had to have his fingers inside her, I said truthfully. Both their faces blanched. They winced in sympathy. Oh, you poor man, Sophie said. What a horrible way to find out. I shrugged. I'm not sure there is a good way, Lise, I said. But it's over and done with now. I looked down at the grass about my feet, so I wouldn't have to admit to the sting of tears that had suddenly rushed to my eyes. Emily had evidently come over to tell them of the divorce a few days ago. Sophie said Emily had been mad as hell that Sophie wouldn't support her. It had been just a horrible mistake, according to Emily. When Sophie had called her a tramp and some other things, Emily had left in a huff. That was my Emily, all right. Blame everyone but the two people who committed the adultery. Jake, Sophie, and I talked for another hour or so before I left. Their 18-month-old baby needed attention, and I wouldn't have been good company at dinner, but they tried hard to get me to stay. 3 months into the negotiations, the question of the pictures ID taken of Emily and Blondie came up. Emily was afraid I was going to put them on the internet. I thought their suggestion was a good one, and I started to look for a website that would handle them. I offered to send copies to everyone at Emily's office and all her friends too. I didn't intend to do that, but it sure got the talks moving again. There would have been some legal complications if I tried to do as I threatened. For one thing, there was the invasion of privacy issue since I had taken the pics through the motel window and without permission from the motel or the participants. I told my attorney I'd go ahead and chance a lawsuit if something didn't nice happen real soon. The next day, Emily's lawyer reopened the question of how to divide the house and offered me 60 of the sale price if I would turn over all copies of the pictures. But I refused. After a while, they offered 55 of the proceeds if I would agree to keep only one copy of the pictures and agree that I would never transmit them over the internet in any way. And oh, by the way, Emily demanded a closed-door meeting between just the two of us. I made a counteroffer of 60. I'd keep only one set of prints, no digital copies, and a maximum of 30 minutes with her. We eventually settled on the 60 of the house, 2 sets of the pictures, one for me and one, surprisingly, for Emilino digital copies, and a 1-hour closed-door meeting. They withdrew all of their motions before the court and agreed to a no-fault divorce at the earliest possible moment. A court order was obtained recognizing Emily and I were no longer living together as man and wife, pending a final divorce decree. Texas does not have legal separations, and this was as close as the attorneys could get to one. It was fine with me. The sale of the residence and furnishings could move forward. The mandatory wait time for the divorce would not be interrupted, and things would be over in another 2 months. Meanwhile, ID made a particularly strong effort to keep my divorce from affecting my job. In fact, I took refuge in my work. I was the first one to arrive in the morning and the last to leave that night. Maybe because he noticed my renewed dedication to the firm, the big boss made me the interim director for the RD branch. He gave me all the problems to solve, but none of the pay increase for that position. I didn't care that much. I just made sure the disaster of my personal life never hurt my professional career. I got there about 10 minutes early. ID expected the traffic to be heavy and make me late, but it was not to be. The meeting between Emily and me was to take place in a temporarily vacant office in my attorney's suite. I was hustled into that office and ushered into the big chair behind the desk. That would have a considerable psychological impact on Emily, they said. It would put her at a disadvantage. One of my lawyer's legal aides, the young woman who'd been so sympathetic when ID initiated the divorce papers, fussed over me for a few minutes, straightening my tie and brushing at some imaginary lint. She leaned very close to me as I sat there. I could smell her perfume, and if ID let my eyes fall from hers, ID have had a superb view down her open neck blouse. When everyone else had left the room to greet the arriving party with my wife, She impulsively kissed my forehead and told me to hang in there, and squeezed my hand encouragingly. Standing, she turned and walked through the doorway, but she looked back and smiled before she disappeared. When everyone was gone, I got up and moved to a seat at the short conference table that abutted up against the front of the big desk. I didn't think I needed any prompts or artificial barriers. My wife had committed adultery. I caught her and I was getting rid of her. I didn't see things as any more complicated than that. When Emily came in, she found me sitting there calmly, placing 5x7 prints on the table of her and her blonde sex toy hammering away at each other on the hotel bed. I was going for neat rows of 6 pictures in each row, but the photos tended to slide on the slick tabletop. It was a lot of effort to make each line of pics line up. I worked while Emily settled herself. When I looked up, there was a flush across her face. She was an attractive woman, not beautiful in the classical sense, but more than just pretty. I knew that under the bulky sweater top and knee-length dark blue skirt, there was a very exciting body. I looked into the face I'd loved for the more than 6 years we'd been together, 4 of them as a married couple. She'd been so warm and affectionate through most of those 6 years. Looking at her now, I couldn't say when the woman I used to know had disappeared or where she'd gone. "You got me really good, didn't you?" she said bitterly, interrupting my train of thought. Her face was twisted into a mask of irritation, something I'd come to expect from her more often than not lately. "I'll bet you're so proud of yourself, aren't you?" I snorted. The puff of air moved 3 prints sideways, and I nudged them back into place with a fingernail. "No," I said quietly. "You got yourself," I told her. I glanced up to see her still glaring at me. She opened her mouth to say something I figured would be spiteful. I beat her to the punch. And no, I am definitely not proud of having caught a tramp cheating around on me. I thought the woman I was married to would never, ever screw some strange man. Exactly why would you think I'd be proud to find out differently? Huh? It took the wind out of her sails, and she sat with a blank expression on her face for a time. I held up my left forearm and checked my watch as ostentatiously as I could. "I was told you wanted to talk to me, so talk. We've got just about 55 minutes left." I leaned back in my chair. I was tired of playing with the pictures. Emily made an effort to keep her eyes from straying to the pictures and look only at me. She took a deep breath. "Ben." She paused and looked at me, expecting me to object again, I guess. "Ben," she continued. "First, I want to say I'm so sorry about all this. I never meant to hurt you. You've got to believe that." "I don't have to believe any such thing," I retorted. "What the hell would make you think you could cheat around behind my back and not have it hurt me?" She looked at me for a long moment. "I never meant for you to find out," she said in a low voice. "And if you hadn't found out, you wouldn't have been hurt." I snorted again, disbelievingly. "What, no harm, no foul, Emily? Either you are pretty damn stupid or you think I am. From what our friends are telling me, you were dry humping this guy on the dance floor and in the casino. You went off somewhere they couldn't find you and didn't manage to corner you until the next afternoon. Sex toy was there in your room with you, and you didn't even try to hide it. Just how the hell did you think you were going to keep me from finding out eventually?" She sat looking at me without saying anything for a bit. "Then why didn't you stop me?" she asked sharply. "What?" I said. "I wasn't there, Emily." She shook her head. "When we came back, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you stop me from seeing him again?" She was getting worked up, but I couldn't understand what she was talking about. "Why didn't you fight for me? You were supposed to love me," she blurted. I shook my head in confusion. This was hard enough without her talking in riddles. "Emily," I said wearily, "I didn't know what you were doing. How could I stop you? Read your mind?" Then it struck me. "Emily, Sophie, and Jake didn't tell me about Vegas until I'd already caught you with your sex toy." She winced at my repeated description of the blonde guy, but I wasn't in any mood to be gentle. "You want to know how I caught you?" I asked challengingly. She nodded. There was a small tear at the corner of her left eye. "I saw you and sex toy while I was sitting in a van at a stoplight," I said shortly. "He had his hands so far up your skirt. I'm surprised his fingers weren't coming out of your mouth," I told her. Her posture changed from one that had been aggressive. She slumped into one of despair and pain. I waited. I'd said my piece. I am so sorry you saw that, Ben, she said finally. I'm sorry I let him do it. I'm sorry all of this happened. You sure didn't look like you were sorry that day, I told her. In fact, you looked like you were having a ball. No pun intended. She cringed in her seat before straightening up. I came here to be honest with you and am going to do it, she said. I was enjoying it, she said. God help me, I was. But no more than I would have if it were your fingers in there or a dildo, Ben, she said. But they weren't your fingers, Emily, I said softly. It wasn't a dildo, and they sure as hell weren't my fingers. They were his, and his had no damn business being there. I slammed my hand down on the polished tabletop, my open palm making a loud smacking thud echo off the law books and the shelves all around. I had an exclusive rights contract with you, Emily, I said. It's called a marriage. No one else in this whole world had any right to put his hands down there except me. Damn it to hell. I sat back, trembling with anger. I fought to keep my temper from exploding. The 24 pictures on the table had all skittered across the surface of the table. To occupy my hands and mind, I began picking them up and placing them in a neat stack in front of me. I'm sorry, Ben, she said after a while. You're right. I should not have done anything with that man. I know that. I don't have any excuses at all. For the first time today, I agree with you, I said, cutting off whatever she was going to say. Yeah, she said. I know. She took a deep breath. Ben, would it make any difference if I told you that the night you took all these pictures, I told him I wasn't going to see him anymore? I glanced up from my pile of photos. She held my eyes with her own. I shrugged. No, not a hell of a lot, I said evenly. She was startled. She thought she had something important to throw into the mix. Emily, you cheated on me in Miami right in front of our friends. When you came home, you didn't come to me and tell me about it. And then you drilled him 3, 4, 5, a dozen times more here in our town. You didn't stop when you came home. What's that saying? What goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. Boy, that sure didn't apply to you, did it? Not one damn bit. Hell, you were like that Energizer bunny, you just kept going and going and going. You know what, Emily? I've been told cheating gets easier every time you do it. Apparently, it is. You sure didn't seem to have any trouble finding places and times to drill your blonde guy. I doubt you would have ever stopped if I hadn't nailed you with some really good pictures and then filed for divorce. You tell me you weren't going to see him anymore, but to put it bluntly, I don't believe you, I told her emphatically. I think you're lying through your teeth. It's true, she snapped. Right after we went into the room, I told him this would be our last time. I'd already decided to stop seeing him. I was feeling guilty and ashamed, and I wanted to end it. She reached out, snagged one of the pictures, and held it up in front of my eyes. You see this? She demanded. He's trying to hurt me here, slamming into me really hard. He was punishing me for telling him I wasn't going to be with him anymore. A little bit after you took this, I got away and kicked the asshole in his balls. I shook my head. I didn't want to see what she was trying to show me, and it really didn't matter. It looks to me like you're getting a little rough sex there. And you were liking it, I said. I held up my hand to stop her from saying something. But let's say you're telling the gospel truth. I leaned on my elbows, partly across the table. If it's true you wanted to stop screwing him, Emily, why the hell didn't you give him a call and tell him? Why was it necessary to give him a goodbye screw? She hung her head. I know it was wrong, but don't bother, Emily. I don't want to hear it. Even if I accept what you say at face value, I don't believe and I never will believe that you would ever have stopped so long as your dirty secret life was still a secret from me. Oh, you might mean what you say. You might have even done it for a week, a month, 6 months maybe. But you'd have gone back to him or found someone else the first damn time you got pissed off at me again or you had car trouble or when you had a bad hair day. Sooner or later, you'd have had that urge to get a little strange and pay me back for every real and imaginary problem we've ever had. Wouldn't you? Isn't that what you were doing, Jen? I had worked myself up again. I had to pull back. I slouched in my chair and tried to look more impassive than I felt. Emily was crying again. You don't have to talk to me like that, she whispered. I'm your wife. I looked away in disgust. Not for very long, I said cruelly. We're separated. The courts have recognized it, and all we have to do is wait another 52 days, and it's all over with. And besides, I talk to tramps and hookers a lot differently from the way I talk to my faithful wife. assuming I ever have one again. The tears were rolling now. Ben, I'm trying to say I'm sorry for what I've done. Can't you understand that? I'm sorry. I shook my head abruptly. I was weary of the whole thing. Okay, Emily, you're sorry. I'm sorry too. Hell, everybody involved in this damn mess is sorry. So what? Where does that get us? We sat quietly for a while. Emily, I said slowly, you've ripped the heart right out of me. I tapped my chest. Right here. There's a big hole, a whole lot of emptiness inside me where I used to keep the image of a woman I loved more than life itself. A woman I trusted with my most private secrets. Someone I could count on to be good to me when the whole world was against me. You were my friend, someone I could talk to, trade opinions about anything under the sun. You were my lover, the one woman in the world I would ever make love to for the rest of my life, and the only woman I wanted to make love to me. You took that all away, and I can't get it back, I told her. My voice cracked on the last few words, and I had to stop. Emily was crying harder. Ben, she interrupted. Emily, I said slowly and carefully, you've half killed me. Screwing that guy, betraying me, betraying yourself, and betraying our marriage. I took a deep breath. I sure hope whatever you got out of it was worth wrecking our marriage and his, 'cause I heard this morning his wife kicked him out and is filing for divorce too. That was true. An investigator working for my attorney had tracked down the garage that had sent a wrecker to pick up 2 sets of slashed tires from a motel, take them back to the shop for repair, and return the tires to the motel and mount them on 2 vehicles. The wrecker driver had remembered a furious brunette woman and a subdued blonde man as owners of the cars. Each of the billing reports had included the license plate number of the vehicle involved, and once he had that, it was child's play for the investigator to find out the man's name and all kinds of personal information. When my attorney told me the guy's identity, I found a phone number for his home and got in touch with his wife. She became enraged when I told her what I knew. I wasn't surprised she had filed for a divorce too. Curiously, it seemed there actually had been 3 teens who had run away from the motel when Emily walked out of her room. They may have been involved in some other mischief, but I knew they hadn't done the tires. I watched my wife crying inconsolably for a while. I wanted to take her in my arms, but she wasn't my woman anymore. She was a stranger. Will you tell me why you did it? I asked. It took her a long time to smother the tears and get control of herself. Sophie and Jake had told me some of what Shed said in Miami. I wanted to see if she could add anything to that. I don't know, Ben, she said a little bitterly. It's like a whole other world out there. It didn't feel real from the minute I got off the plane. Then I got drunk. The lights were so bright, it was like they hypnotized me. You weren't there, and I was mad you wouldn't come with me. Then he was talking to me so nice, telling me how sad it was that I was alone. After a while, I just gave in, Ben. The last phrase was wailed rather than spoken. I looked at her, and for the first time I felt contempt. Well, that's just, I said, trying to find the words to tell her how I felt. I gave up. They wouldn't come. God damn it, none of that is any excuse, I said finally, exploding. First of all, I had to go to Denver and fix that damn glitch in the proposed power delivery system. If I hadn't gone, I'd have been fired. And if I didn't have a job, we couldn't make the payments on that nice big house you just had to have a couple of years back. I couldn't be with you in Vegas, damn it. It wasn't a matter of not wanting to. Don't you think I would have if I could? What else was it? Oh yeah, you got drunk. Well, excuse the hell out of me, sugar pie honey bunch, but who the hell told you to get drunk in the first place? Are you a child that someone has to take a glass of rum out of your hands when you shouldn't be drinking it? Screw you. You had no business even thinking of getting drunk if you can't control who you let shove a meat up your damned holes when you do. Bright lights hypnotized? What the hell does that mean? Emily? Should everyone treat you like you had some kind of mental problem because you might be hypnotized by the pretty lights? Give me a break. I took some deep breaths and leaned heavily on the left arm of my chair. Then something else Shed said made me mad all over again. I sat up straight and leaned across the table toward her. And you said he was talking to you real nice. Isn't that just precious? You're an attractive woman, Emily. Of course men are going to come on to you. So what? Who the goddamn hell told you a married woman has a right to even think about letting some strange guy console you and flatter you and tell you how rotten it was that your husband wasn't there? Huh? That's what he did, didn't he, Emily? He told you I was a sorry son of a bitch for not being there for you, didn't he? She nodded, mopping up some of her tears with an already sodden tissue. Yeah, I said contemptuously. And you lapped it up, didn't you? I shook my head in disgust. Damn it, Emily, you talked about being drunk and drinking. You were married. A married woman or a man, hell, it applies to all of us. The fact is you were supposed to act like you were a recovering alcoholic. I mean that a married person is like someone who can never touch alcohol, ever. But you did. You know what? The first time you danced with him too close, the first time you let him touch your arm in a possessive way, you were an alcoholic breaking your vow to never touch the stuff. Our marriage vows said we would forsake all others, Emily. Forsake all others. What the hell did you not understand about that? Do you think I'm so ugly and unattractive, so inept in bed, that I couldn't have been doing what you did? Don't you understand I get chances to spend a night or two with strange women every single time I go on a trip? Damn it, I have to travel 7 or 8 times a year, and every place I go there's a secretary in the office, a professional woman from down the hall, a waitress in a restaurant, or a woman in the hotel bar where I go for a nightcap. Maybe it's just a girl I pass in the corridor going to my room, but every time I go somewhere there's a woman who I might be able to have sex with. But you know what? I never have. I've been propositioned 10 times, by 10 women this last year alone, I think. And I've never even given one of them a second's worth of consideration because I had my loving woman at home. Guess you fooled me. Huh? I said bitterly. If I'd only known. I shook my head disgustedly. There was no sound but crying in the room for a long while. Emily just sat there, hunched over. Her shoulders were shaking from the sobs she didn't want me to see. I didn't know why Emily had wanted to talk to me, but it was me doing most of the talking. I started up again, breaking the long silence. You should never have let that bastard touch you at all, Emily, I said, starting in again. I couldn't let this topic die. It was killing me. The first time he did, and you let him get away with it, you took a swallow from the cup that you could never drink from if you wanted to stay married to me. The first time you let him kiss you, you did it again. The second he put his hand on your body. Oh hell, what's the point? Abruptly, my rage left me. I slumped in my seat and tried to breathe slowly. I don't know what else there is to say, Emily, I said finally. I just know you've ruined something that was really beautiful. You know that? Now I don't have anything but pain, and it won't go away. I loved you with all my being. Hell, I still love you, I guess. I haven't learned how to turn it off yet and then back on like a faucet the way you have. Ben, Emily said tentatively. If you can still love me, we could try again. She stopped when she saw me shaking my head. But you made love to me so good that Sunday before you left me. She wailed, shaking her head in confusion. Not hardly, I said brusquely. I wasn't making love to you that night, Emily. I was drilling you and making you come over and over so you'd remember it when I left. I'm sorry I did it now. It was a mean thing to do, something childish, arrogant, and worthless. I'm sorry I did it, I said. Emily looked shocked and then dismayed. She'd pinned her hopes on me having a desire to get back with her. We sat looking at each other for a time. Oh, and no, I can't try again, I said, remembering the question. I don't have anything left to try with, Emily, I said at last. I don't believe a word you say. I know for a fact that you've lied through your teeth every day since you started screwing that asshole. You were deceiving me every minute of every day. And that's one cruel, heartless thing to do to someone who loves you. I can't possibly trust you anymore, Emily. I can't imagine ever trusting you again out of my sight. I can't live that way, Emily. I sighed, leaning my head back on the back of the chair and looking up at the ceiling tiles. I don't know what I did to deserve this, Emily, I said musingly. Based on that last night of sex we had together, I seem to be able to satisfy you sexually. If I can't, you're one hell of an actress. I never saw so many fake orgasms all strung together that night, if that's what you were doing. I was quiet for a bit, trying to get it all straight in my mind. You know, Emily, I know I'm not perfect. I don't always see when you're unhappy about something. Sometimes I don't pick up on your signals quick enough. I know there are times you want to talk to me, and am wrapped up in something else and I don't understand. There are times I don't have a clue what it is you want me to do, and I've never learned how to talk to you when you're mad. But right off the top of my head, I've never shut myself off from you. I try to be considerate, even if I don't succeed all the time. Hell, I only watch one football game a week on TV just to make room for a little extra time with you on weekends. I take you out when we can afford it. I bring you flowers or a little something every so often. I guess I don't do everything I could. But I try. I guess there are a lot of times I'm not the man I'd like to be. But what the goddamn hell did I ever do to you to make you do something like this? Nothing. Nothing at all, Ben, Emily said in a rush. It was just me, all right? I did something incredibly mean and stupid and spiteful, and I'm sorry for having hurt you. I'm so ashamed, and I feel so unclean that I did those things with him, Ben. I feel guilty all the time now. I wish so bad that I could go back and stop myself. But I can't, Ben. I can't push some undo button and make it all go away. I wish I could. She was quiet. I guess she was all cried out for the time being. I can't keep from wondering, Emily, I said in a voice barely above a whisper. When did you make the decision that you could have sex with him and it would be all right? And how did you make a decision like that, huh? What made it okay in your mind to use sex with someone else to solve a problem you had with me? Huh? I never made a decision to do any of that, Ben, she said in the same voice. If I had been making decisions, I wouldn't have made this bad a mistake. It just happened. I didn't want it. I didn't go looking for it, she said. That did it. I had enough. I straightened up in my chair and started gathering the pictures together and patting them into a neat stack. I was fed up with all the excuses. No, it didn't just happen, I said briskly. Come on. Emily, you weren't just walking through the casino that night and suddenly found a strange man sticking out of your holes. No, sir. That's not what happened. You let this happen. Hell, Emily, let's be frank here, you made it happen. After you got back home. And by the way, you damn sure did want it, and you most emphatically did go looking for it, at least here in the town we live in. Even if I believe you when you say you didn't in Vegas. Take a little responsibility for this, Emily. This wasn't a lightning bolt coming out of a clear sky. You did it. You liked it. And you kept on doing it. Period. She just looked at me. She was in shock, I guess. And it wasn't a mistake either, I added. A mistake is when you reach for a can of tomato soup on a supermarket shelf and you come away with mushroom instead. Hell, this is more like the mother of all catastrophes, and I guess that's just the way it's going to have to be, Emily, I told her. I can't live with a woman I can't trust. They don't have chastity belts anymore, and I wouldn't lock you in one if they did. If I have to worry every time I leave your side that you're going to be screwing some guy when I'm out of sight, well, I'd rather just get out of the situation. They'll leave you to every Tom, Dick, or Harry you want to screw, or do all three of them at one time for all I care. I put the pictures in my inside jacket pocket and stood up. I don't have anything else to say, Emily, and the time we agreed to talk is almost over. Do you have anything you need to say to me? She stood and looked me in the eye across the table. Just one thing, Ben, and then you can go if that's what you want. I just thought I could explain to you what happened and see if we might find a way through this. I snatched one of the pictures from my coat pocket. I held it by one corner and showed it to her. Emily, I don't need an explanation. This is it. This is what happened. This one photograph tells me everything I need to know. If it didn't, what Jake and Sophie told me would have done the job. Sooner or later. I don't understand where you're coming from. Don't you get it? When you went up to your room in Miami with that man and closed the hotel door behind you, you shut me out of your life. You killed the marriage with just that one act. All the rest of it is just piled on top of more. There is nothing you can explain away. The facts are the facts, and nothing on God's green earth is going to change them. I don't know what else I can say. Well, how about if I say there is no explanation that will change a damn thing? Does that make it any clearer? She seemed to summon some last bit of courage. In the process, she completely ignored what I just said. I guess she surely didn't comment on it. Ben, I love you, and I will always love you. I want you to remember that, she said. I've been selfish, petty. I've screwed things up bad, but I won't ever stop loving you. Can you understand that, Ben? I nodded. I shrugged. I didn't doubt she thought she did, standing with me in this room and at this moment. But it was an awfully one-dimensional, self-serving love if it was flexible enough to let her do what she'd done. I pulled my jacket into a better fit across my shoulders and turned away from the woman who had been my wife. Ben, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know, I muttered, not looking at her. I didn't say anything else, and neither did she. Emily didn't try to touch me as I walked out the door. I was glad because I knew whatever she felt for me deep inside. Locked away in a vault I'd never open again. I still loved her as much as the day I'd married her. Love couldn't overcome this. She dishonored our marriage and me. There was nothing left to salvage, and it was best left behind. I shut the door behind me, closing it firmly but without making an echo boom down the corridor. 7 months later, I was free. I still work at the same place. Emily left town. She moved to a different city. I have not started dating and don't intend to do it in the near future. Thank you for watching this intense and emotional story unfold. What would you do if you found yourself in a similar situation? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content.